It's taken me over 10 years of boxing, hundreds of rounds of sparring, probably a lot of brain cells, and a bunch of different coaches to finally come to the realization of what I'm going to teach you in this video. That realization is that punching exists on a spectrum. One end you've got rotation, and the other end you've got driving off the back foot or pushing. And where you sit on that spectrum determines your style, your technique, and whether you're going to be able to land a punch or not in any given situation. This video is going to be an absolute banger, so make sure you watch all the way to the end for the best understanding and eventually the best results in the ring. Okay, so this spectrum I've been talking about, let's start by defining what either end of this spectrum is. On the one end, we've got purely rotational punches. This is where I keep the weight in the same place and I just focus on twisting my hips, pivoting on the back foot to throw my punch. All right, to throw a rear hand punch, all I have to do is pivot from my stance being in its like a default position to being in its rotated position where I close the hips like this. Okay, so I just go from here for the rear hand, and then for the lead hand, I just open them up again. All right, so I just pivot back to where they were as I throw the lead hand, whether that's a lead uppercut, whether that's a lead hook, whether that's a jab, whatever the punch is, I just pivot from the rotated position to the original position. Okay, and that means that I can link everything together. So I can go jab, cross, lead hook, purely rotationally, don't know if that's a word, without having to explode forwards, transfer my weight at all. So I can keep my weight back whilst doing that. That's one end of the spectrum. Right at the other end of the spectrum is where there's minimal rotation and all the punching is kind of focused on transferring the weight from the back foot to the front foot and back again, okay? For example, instead of rotating with my cross, I can just transfer my weight onto the front foot, or with a jab, I can just transfer my weight forwards, and then at the end, as my weights come onto the front foot, then I just let my arms snap out, and that produces a lot of power going forwards. Okay, but then I have to push back off my front foot to come here unless I'm continuing the combination. In the center of the spectrum, we've got a combination of both. So sometimes we can still explode our body weight forwards, but we can also rotate our body at the same time, whether that's with the rear hand or with the lead hand. We can transfer our weight forwards and we can rotate our body as well. Now this is going to be the sweet spot. This is where we get the most power. This is where we get the most explosiveness. And we get the pros of both mixed into one. So before I go into what situations you use each kind of punching style, what's actually the difference in terms of the technique? First of all, we'll start with stance. So if I'm just purely rotating, my stance needs to be a little bit shorter. All right? The reason being is because when I'm exploding forwards and backwards, I need that wider stance to be able to transfer the weight forwards and backwards easier. Because my stance is wider, it means that I can push off to forwards and backwards a little bit better. When my stance is more narrow, it means I can rotate a little bit easier because now I've got more hinge in my hips as opposed to here when my stance is wide, there's no hinge in my hips, I have to stretch and I have to reach in. Not only does that destroy any power I got from the rotation, but it also means I end up leading my head in as well. So we get the worst of both worlds. We've got to make sure when we're rotating, when we're throwing these longer combinations, that the stance is a little bit more narrow. When we're exploding forwards or in and out, we're on the bounce, boom, boom, or boom, boom. Our stance is slightly wider so we can effectively transfer the weight between the front and the back foot. When we're rotating, this back heel can come down a little bit more often. Okay, it doesn't have to always be primed and ready. When I'm transferring the weight and I'm exploding forwards and backwards, that back heel is always up. Okay, sometimes the front heel is also up. So we can easily transfer our weight onto the balls of the feet instead of coming onto the heels where I can't push off. We also want to angle our back foot a little bit more forwards and our front foot a little bit more sideways when we're transferring our weight forwards and backwards. In comparison to when we're just rotating, our feet are basically at 90 degrees to each other, okay? Because this foot wants to be pointing forwards so our hips are open so we can close them properly. And this foot wants to be pointing out to the side for the same reason. As soon as I start transferring my body weight, it's way better to prime the foot like this, where the foot's kind of pointing more forwards and the front foot is pointing slightly more sideways. So when I do transfer my weight forwards, I can push off easily. When I've got my foot pointing completely forwards here, it's very common for you to come onto the heel to try and push off. It just doesn't work as well. It works much better when you've got your feet kind of at the same sort of angle, maybe like 20 degrees from front on. When I'm purely rotating, I just want to keep my hips hinged and my knees bent, right, to continue longer combinations, as that's one of its pros. When I'm exploding forwards and backwards, I'm actively extending the hips and the knee to be able to create that forwards force, okay, in whatever punch I'm throwing. This is especially true when you're throwing uppercuts. When you throw an uppercut, you can kind of squat down a little bit and really extend, come through and come up, all right, to get as much explosive power into the punch as possible. Same with hooks. I can come up with a hook, or up with the hook, or forwards with the hook. Now, it doesn't really have to be a jump or any sort of gazelle hook. You can just shift the weight slightly forwards onto the front foot, whereas rotating, you actually bring it more backwards. It's kind of like you pull the hook round when you're focused on rotation. But when you're focused on pushing, driving forwards, the weight actually comes forwards because that's the direction that your punch is sort of traveling. Then we've got our guard. When we're just purely rotating, guard's a little bit tighter because we're usually in closer range here. When we're exploding forwards, we start a little bit longer, or we start with our hands down, okay? And if you watch like Prince Nassim, when he throws those crazy uppercuts, he'll like crouch right down here and then he'll just shoot the punch straight up, okay? That's a very explosive style of punching. The other slight difference between them is my head position. When I'm just purely rotating, my head doesn't really move unless I'm dropping to like a slip, so a body shot or an uppercut, or I'm coming up the other side for a body shot and an uppercut. Whereas when you're springing forwards and backwards, your head's basically always following where your feet are going. Right? Sometimes it's going over your feet a little bit. Let's say when I throw a really powerful jab, my head's naturally just going to come forwards a little bit because all my body weight is shifting onto that front leg. As I said earlier, the sweet spot is kind of in the middle of this spectrum. A great example of this would be someone like Thomas Hearns, because he could get his hips right into the punch, but still kind of explode forwards at the same time. So he's still getting all of the body weight behind the punch, but he's also getting a lot of drive from his hips and a lot of rotation. So why would I purely rotate, or why would I purely push and transfer my weight if the sweet spot is in the middle? Well, there's certain pros and cons of each end of the spectrum, and they're dependent on the situations that you're in, or the punches or combinations or style that you're trying to embody. For example, pushing means that you can punch harder and faster whilst closing the range, like aggressively, right? So if I explode forwards to the left hook, I'm coming here, I can close the range whilst driving my body weight forwards. But the downsides to that is if I'm traveling forwards as I punch, then all I'm doing is just maximizing my opponent's power. If they manage to counter me and throw a left hook of their own as I come in, then I'm just increasing their power because my face is traveling faster towards their fist. Also, once you've exploded into range, you can't explode again further into range because you're already there. So once you've come forwards, right, you can't just keep coming forwards. You can't just keep driving off your back foot, right, and just pushing your opponent back. What if they just hold their ground and they stay there? Right, that's when we've got to switch to the rotation end of the spectrum. That's where we've got to plant the feet, not be so focused on transferring our body weight forwards, and now using the twisting of our shoulders to throw the punches. I'm not saying that you can't, that means you have to purely just rotate and pivot on the back foot. You can still add little bounces, transfers of weight from front to back, but linking the combination together is going to be mostly rotational. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to sustain the combination because you have to just constantly reset your position to be able to throw the next punch. Also, it takes up loads of energy to constantly have to load and then explode with your punches. So sometimes it's better to actually just plant your feet, stay still, and focus on rotation when you're in range, and just letting your hands go. That's much, much easier than jumping all around all over the place, especially if you're not that athletic. And as I said, when you're in range, where is the punching power going to come from if you can't constantly just explode your body weight forwards off your back foot all the time? It's obviously going to come from the rotation. Right, whether you're coming at beneath, you're loading this back leg, you're twisting over here, or you're from this front leg, you're twisting over here. That's where your power is going to start coming from. You can't just constantly keep pushing off the back. That's for you closing the range, being aggressive with more powerful punches. Once you're already there, you need to be able to link punches together through proper rotation. And that doesn't mean you need to do like a full 180-degree twist every time you throw a punch, right? Some parts of the combination could be a setup, so that 1-2 hook could just be a small twist in the shoulders, and then when I drop here to throw the hook to the body, boom, and I use a lot more rotation to get a lot more power because that's the punch I was setting up. All right, so it's also about varying how much you twist your body with each punch as well. So if your punching style is purely rotating, that's great for longer combinations, linking punches together. It's great if you're not so much of a mover and you don't like moving around all over the place. You're a little bit more planted and wanting to work on the inside. Much better if you can learn how to rotate. And I personally believe that when you first start boxing, you should learn how to rotate your hips so that when you do learn how to explode off the back foot, then you can still get your hips into the punch as well. And you can find that sweet spot a little bit easier. By the way, if you're a beginner boxer and you want direct access to me, my community of boxers, and a structured grading program, then you're welcome to join my online boxing school where I focus purely on ironing out your bad habits and installing a solid foundation of fundamentals. Click the link in the first line of the description to join. Back to the video. Whereas the pushing style of punching is more for an aggressive start to combinations, but not maintaining them. It's for closing the range quickly. If you watch someone like Benavidez, he'll like follow his opponent down high guard, and then he'll literally prime his back foot, and then he'll just shoot out a fast jab or a fast cross. Sorry, I'll show you a better angle. Or a fast cross. And he's doing that purely from transferring the weight off the back foot onto the front foot for a split second and then back again. He'll do that like several times. And then once he's got close enough to you, he'll switch to the other end of the spectrum, sorry, this end, the more rotating style. When he's got you here, he's using that rotation of the trunk. He's no longer exploding forwards to try and close the range or to try and pressure you and get you on the ropes. And of course, the pushing style where you're transferring the weight is great for those multiple face attacks. Boom. Transferring the weight from the back foot to the front foot, letting your hands go and then back again. All right, or in, out, boom, boom, boom. So when do you use what? When do you push? When do you rotate? Usually, rotation is a little bit more of a professional fighting style because the rounds are a little bit longer. You want to maintain your stamina a little bit more. So you kind of a little bit more to this end of the spectrum. You plant your feet, you sort of stalk your opponent and walk them down, and you keep a tight guard. You don't really come out of this little hip hinge here. You don't really come up that much. You don't really expose your body that much. You kind of stay low and small like this. Whereas in the amateurs, it's mostly about pushing off the back foot because you've got to explode in and out and it's all fast paced. You don't want to conserve your energy. It's like a sprint. So you want to use all the benefits of pushing yourself in and out, off the back foot, off the front foot. So you're constantly in and out of range and you can explode forwards with punches as well, because you've only got 3 rounds to do it all. The more planted, rotating style works great for more technical fighters. You like to work on the inside, using rolls, blocking, parries, shifting, manipulating their opponent's position. This is much better for the more technical fighters when they're staying low and small and compact. If you're a complete beginner and you don't have any of those more advanced skills, then the in and out, driving off the back foot onto the front and back again is going to be way more effective for you because you can use your best defense, which is just your position in the ring. If you can just constantly change your position with your feet, then you don't have to even worry about blocking or moving your head. You don't even need those skills yet. You can literally just go in and out with your jab, maybe use a couple hand defenses, but it's not like you're going to be there rolling under punches, trying to block, catch, and pin them to throw those more technical kind of attacks. That doesn't mean that amateurs should just be more explosive and professionals should just be more planted and rotational. Obviously, there's exceptions in both. If you're really good at cutting off the ring and really good on the inside and getting someone in the corner, then you can use that planted style in the amateurs. Just from what I've seen and what I've experienced, it isn't as effective as bouncing around all over the ring and scoring points and getting out of range. And then you've got the pros like Prince Nassim that I mentioned earlier in the video that are always using those explosive, driving from down here, shooting right up, exploding forwards into range in the pros as well. So again, it's just a question of which style you prefer, but it's being able to do both ends of the spectrum. And to what degree are you gonna do either of those styles? Because, for example, if we just took the jab, you could just purely rotate with a jab, keep your feet planted, all right? Or I could add a little bit of weight transfer. My head comes slightly forwards. There's a little bit more body movement and effort involved, but my hand gets there quicker. Or I could maybe transfer my weight a little bit more. Okay, now there's more energy. Now there's more movement of my body, but my hand's getting there faster, more powerful. Or I could really drive off my back foot, but then I'm putting myself in even more risk, but there's a greater reward. I get more power in snapping my punch, more likely to land. If you've got an even balance of both styles of punching, then you can adapt to your opponent depending on what their style is. If you've got someone who is constantly pressuring you coming forwards, you need to be able to use that sweet spot where you can drive through with the hips, rotate with the shoulders as well, and drive off the back foot to make sure that they're not gonna just keep walking forwards into your shots. You wanna be able to punch hard, and you wanna be able to combine the power of both ends of the spectrum. Whereas if you've got someone who goes on the back foot all the time, you wanna be able to cut off the ring, you wanna be able to have that planted style, so when you get them in the corner, you can work on the inside and know how to punch just based on your rotation. If there's one thing that I want you to take from this video is that you need to be versatile with how you can punch and mix it up. Don't become so predictable on how your jab comes out, for example. You mix it up, you could either just tap the jab, purely just rotating the shoulders a little bit, not really moving the feet, or get that back heel up, pointing the foot forwards, you drive forwards with the jab, or you throw from different angles. So you have the ability to at least do so. You get predictable if you just stick to one punching style. If it's just here, like this, all the time, and it's none of this, okay, you're not bouncing forwards in and out, or you're not mixing it up with rotating your body, then, as I say, you get predictable. The thing is, I can tell you all of this information, but if you haven't got a coach there as a second pair of eyes, watching every move that you make, then you're not gonna get enough feedback required to know whether you're actually doing it correctly or not. And that's why I made my online school community. It's got a structured learning path of grades, which I personally assess you on and then move you on to the next one. It's got a great community with a culture of feedback there. So when you post a video, people will drop a bunch of comments, including me, on what you need to improve. And of course, there's direct access to me if you want me as your coach. The link will be in the top line of the description. Hopefully, I'll see you inside.